Good afternoon. We are here today on a National Dialogue Forum platform, which is a non-partisan public policy consulting firm based in Islamabad. NDF regularly hosts policy dialogues discussing a host of domestic and regional affairs by engaging leading experts from around the globe. Today we are really pleased to be joined by Mr. Adam Weinstein, who is a research fellow at the Quincy Institute based in New York. Adam's current research focuses on security, trade, rule of law in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Adam's analysis on Afghanistan and Pakistan has been featured in Foreign Policy, War on the Rocks, Lawfare, and the National Interest. Adam, delighted to have you here. And I think initially we had thought that we are going to discuss Afghanistan deeply, but you are here today on Sunday and you are also watching a lot of very interesting developments inside Pakistan's own political scene. We've just seen some drama around the vote of no confidence. So if you have any questions and comments on that, we'll welcome you on that. But I think my first questions and interest would be related to Afghanistan's unfolding situation, and also particularly on the US. You live in Washington DC and New York. Between that, you're based there. How do you read US policy changes that, of course, we saw expressed very strongly in sanctions and other regimes after the Taliban takeover? But now, 6 or 7 months later, do you see any trends of changes, nuances in US policies on the Taliban, or do you think it's the continuation of what we saw earlier?
Well, first, thanks for having me, Dr. Khan. It's great to have this discussion. It's a timely discussion. What happened in August of this last year was unprecedented. We had fought the Taliban or the Afghan Taliban as a terrorist organization, as an insurgency.
Sure.
They were sanctioned as a terrorist organization. And what essentially happened is overnight, they became the de facto government. Now, I mean by overnight in terms of how rapid the collapse of the Afghan government was. Obviously, it was years and years in the making. But this created an unprecedented situation where a designated terrorist organization that was sanctioned by the United States and the United Nations was now the de facto government of Afghanistan, and so those sanctions essentially became sanctions that were applied to Afghanistan to the government of Afghanistan, and in effect to Afghanistan as a territory. Even though they weren't sanctions technically on the territory of Afghanistan, in effect, the entire country became sanctioned. And so I think US policymakers were scrambling. They didn't know what to do. And over time, you saw them became more pragmatic about it. They issued general licenses, which are essentially exemptions or exceptions to sanctions. And first they focused on humanitarian aid, and then with this latest General License 20, they focused on commercial transactions for cross-border trade.
So, you may have noticed today, and I don't know if you had time to go through that, but there was a very important press conference that the head of the Taliban, the leader of Taliban, Maulana Akhundzada, held today, and they made that announcement, which was a very key part of what they did in the 90s, that they are now again banning drug trade and narcotics trade. And we also know that for a lot of key members of the international community, stakeholders, especially in Europe, drug trade from Afghanistan is part of the the drug problem that they face in their own countries, and that the restrictions and dealing with the Taliban and dealing with the Afghans over this drug trafficking was a major issue. Do you think that this announcement, first of all, is that going to go any distance in changing not US, but basically EU-related policymakers as far as their relationship with the Taliban is concerned? Secondly, will they be able to enforce it in any meaningful way? Because we know that since their takeover, drug production has actually increased, and because there was such a lot of economic hardships and shrinkage of the economy due to the sanctions, there was actually greater reliance and obviously also rent-seeking from the drug practice that the Taliban themselves were involved in, and they did not want to stop the farmers who were anyways facing the brunt of economic downturn, to stop them from drug production. So your views on that would be great to get a sense of this.
Well, first I'd say there was a shrinkage or a contraction of the economy for many reasons.
Yeah.
The sanctions were a big reason.
Yeah.
The frozen assets of the central bank were another reason. The flight of US dollars was a reason. And the mismanagement of the Afghan Taliban and their insistence on engaging in nepotism and putting unqualified people in certain posts was a reason, including sanctioned individuals, which created reputational damage and business risk. So all of these were reasons. In terms of the proclamation today by the Taliban, I don't think it will have a big effect because I don't know how they would enforce it, and I don't know what the economic repercussions would be. This is kind of a disconnect between the Taliban and the international community, in which the Taliban has become quite good at issuing directives and issuing proclamations, and sometimes they sound quite nice. But there's a huge trust deficit between the international community and the Taliban. And of course, sending girls back home from high school just recently only increased that trust deficit.
So you don't think this is going to be a huge kind of a shift? This will get them the policy output that they actually wanted out of this, because this announcement to the media, to local media and international media, was meant to create certain outcomes. You don't think that they will get any kind of outcomes out of this announcement? You don't think this will change anything for them?
Well, they might get some interested engagement behind the scenes, and perhaps that's useful if they're genuine about this. But what the Taliban really need to be doing is implementing policies that they can actually implement to decrease that trust deficit. So an example would be sending girls back to high school. It would immediately set the stage for further engagement. And it's something that they could do tomorrow if they so willed it. Of course, there would be limits. There would be schools that aren't available. There would be funding constraints. But
to lift that ban that they have placed, just that in itself would make a bit difference. I agree with you there, and we've been hearing and we've been following that there's a lot of internal kind of pushback by the Afghans themselves. There have been a number of religious scholars that have gone out and said that this is, kind of against the injunctions of Islam, and even the protections and even the rights that are offered to women and girls under Sharia. This is against that, to stop them from education and school. So there is a lot of discussion and hope that probably they will be more open to actually giving into internal civil society's own pressure, to be seen to be giving into that rather than to international pressure. It would be more politically expedient for them to kind of say, okay, this is a pushback coming from the Afghan society and ordinary Afghans, and we will give in and change that rather than the international community. But we're still waiting to see how that pans out, that we haven't seen. But do you think this kind of announcement on the drug trade and cultivation inside Afghanistan will open a few more doors, at least with some of those international agencies which are, against narcotic trades, whether they're UN related or other international agencies, to start engaging with the Taliban as to what and exactly how they're going to manage this, and what would entail a whole process by which this can be gauged and judged whether they're being successful or unsuccessful. Do you think that will open a little bit more opportunities of discussion and engagement?
Well, to your earlier point,
on a limited scale on this issue.
To your earlier point, I just want to say I do think it's essential that the Taliban be responsive to the Afghan people. We saw that when they opened schools in Herat, that was due to local demand. I do not think the Taliban will be responsive to international lecturing or international demands, and in some ways that can even be counterproductive. I actually think with the Taliban you have to engage first, demand second, which is counterintuitive for typical, especially Western ideas of diplomacy and negotiation, in which oftentimes the West, and particularly the United States, thinks sitting down at the table itself is already a concession and requires a concession on the part of who you're sitting across from. So this will have to be locally driven, and it will take time, and the international community can emphasize its importance, but I don't think the Taliban will be responsive to demands. In terms of this latest proclamation, it does open the door for dialogue. And look, the Taliban over and over have demonstrated they're willing to talk. The question isn't whether the Taliban's willing to talk, it's whether they're willing to talk pragmatically and get into the details and take actions. And I think the international community is ready to talk, but they're not going to talk just for the sake of talking. They want to see a real plan.